everyone, today we're going to go through a beginner version of Time of Your Life by Greenday. We'll go through the chords used throughout the song so that we're familiar and comfortable playing them, and then move into how the song is played step by step, verse by verse, nice and slow and together. Now the first thing we want to do before we start playing guitar is to be sure our guitar is in tune. I suggest using a digital tuner so that your guitar can be in perfect tuning. Time of Your Life is played in standard tuning. Another good thing to remember before you start playing guitar is to make sure that your fingernails are cut nice and short so that it's easier for you to press down into the strings. This will avoid any unnecessary muting or buzzing of the strings. Also, we're going to number our fingers so that when I explain to you which fingers to use throughout the chords, you'll know exactly what I mean. So, finger number 1 is going to be our index finger, finger number 2 is going to be our middle finger, finger number 3 is going to be our ring finger, and of course finger number 4 is going to be our pinky finger. Okay? Now let's move into the chords used throughout the song. Time of Your Life is played around a few different chords. I'll go into them in detail, but just so that we know what we're getting ourselves into, it first starts off with a G major chord, what I like to call a 4-finger G. Then he moves up to a C add 9, and then he moves into a D, and then he plays a variation of an E minor, but the way I usually play it myself is I play an E minor 7, which puts these other fingers down here at the bottom on your B and your high E string. And what that does is it makes it a little easier to move around because your third finger will always be on the guitar. You'll never ever let it go, which makes it easier to get a little quicker at the song if you want to practice. That E minor 7 sounds like this. Okay, so first before we start, let's get tuned. Okay, let's start with our big E string. There's our big E. Let's move on to the A string. There's our A. Let's move on to the D. Okay, there's our D. Let's move on to the G string. Okay, there's our G. Now to the second last one, the B. And last but not least, our high E string. Okay, now let's move into the song and I'll show you exactly how to play the chords. Okay, so for the G major chord, the next chord is a G major, or what I like to call a 4-finger G, where all 4 fingers are used. Our number 2 finger is going to go onto the 3rd fret on the big E string. Our number 2 finger is going to go onto the 2nd fret on the A string. And our number 3 and number 4 fingers are going to go down here onto the 3rd fret on the B for our number 3 finger and the E for our number 4 finger. And that gives us our G major. Now for the C add 9. C add 9 uses the same structure as a G major chord and also uses all 4 fingers. These 2 fingers don't move at all. What we're going to do is these 2 fingers are going to stay in the same position and they're going to move down like this. See that? So finger number 2 is going to be now on the 3rd fret on the A string, and finger number 1 is going to be on the 2nd fret on the D string. Finger number 3 and 4 stay put. And this is how this sounds. C add 9. Okay? Now, because we're already in this C add 9 shape, it makes it much simpler to move into a D. The next chord, D, uses only 3 fingers. Lift finger number 1, lift finger number 2, number 3 stays on there, lift finger number 4. Finger number 3 is going to stay on the guitar for this. And then what we can do is we can take finger number 2, middle finger, and put it down on the high E string on the 2nd fret. Then finger number 1 is going to come around here onto the G string onto the 2nd fret. And that's our D chord. Now the other chord he's going to play, which is in the chorus, is an E minor.
The next chord, E minor, is only using 2 fingers. Whichever 2 fingers is most comfortable for you is what you should use.
Take our first 2 fingers. Finger number 1 is going to go onto the 2nd fret on the A string. Finger number 2 is going to go onto the 2nd fret onto the D string. And we're just going to hit all the strings. And there's our E minor. Okay, now let's move into the rhythm. Okay, so the rhythm goes from a G major to a C add 9 to a D, and then he repeats. And the rhythm goes like this with our strumming hand. I'll play it nice and slow, and then we'll play it nice and slow together. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that was a G major, C add 9, then a D. Okay, now let's play that together. We'll go even slower than I did. Okay, on the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. G, C add 9, D. Okay, you can rewind, you can practice that again with me, or you can practice on your own. And now we're going to move into the next part. So what happens at the next part is after he plays his D chord, he's going to go into an E minor. Okay, now I'm going to play it through just one line so you can see how it sounds, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to play it together. So we're going to go G, C add 9, D, and then we're going to go into the next part, which starts on the E minor. And when I get to the E minor, I'll stop, because the E minor is the start of a new verse and it goes backwards, and I'm going to explain that in a second. So we'll go like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so into that E minor, the 2 fingers, number 1 and number 2. Number 1 on the 2nd fret on the A string, number 2 on the 2nd fret on the D string. Okay, now let's practice that transition together. So we'll go from the G major to the C add 9 to a D, and then we'll come up to the E minor, and then we'll stop. And then I'm going to show you how the E minor goes into the next verse. Here we go on the G. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now from this E, I'm going to start playing from the E, and I'm going to show you how he does this. He basically does all the same chords, but backwards. So he starts from an E minor, then he goes to the D, then he goes to the C add 9, then back to a G major. And then he goes back to the E again. Okay, I'm going to play that at my speed, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to play it together even slower. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. together, nice and slow. From the E minor, then to a D, then to a C add 9, then to a G major. And we'll do it twice together, nice and slow. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Now you can stop the video and you can practice that. And now we're going to go into the last part. Okay, so in the last part that he plays, he goes from an E minor to a G major. And that's when he's singing, "It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right." That part. So I'm going to play it for you so you know how it sounds. And then we're going to play it together. Okay, so this next part, when he sings, "It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right." When he plays that part, we're going to move into an E minor chord, then to a G major chord. And he does this twice, so back to an E minor, and back to a G major. Now at this point, when he goes back to the E minor, he jumps down to a D chord. And then from the D chord, he goes back into his chorus, which starts off on the G. So played in regular time, it should sound like this. Okay, now let's play that nice and slow together now. Okay, here we go again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Back to the E minor. Back to the G major. E minor, now to the D. Now back to the G major. Okay? Let's play that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, after doing 2 verses, what happens is there's a little bit of a solo with a violin, I believe it is. And what he does over the violin is he just strums the verse. I think he does that 2 times. And then he goes into the E minor, which would be like a verse 1.5. And then right after the solo is done, he goes back into the E minor when he's singing, "It's something unpredictable." And he goes back into that one. So what we can do is I'm going to play through the whole part while the solo's going on, and then you can listen, and then I'm going to stop, and then we're going to play it together, and I'll tell you what chords we have to go through so that we can learn it together. Okay? So I'm going to start on the G major. So here I go. Now we go to the E minor. E minor again. And to the E minor, and to the G major. Back to the E minor, and to the G major. Back to the E, and this is where we end, to the D. And that's the whole thing. Now let's play that nice and slow together. I'll walk you through each chord so that I'll tell you which one we're going to go to. We'll go nice and slow so that you have as much time as possible to switch chords. We're going to start with the G major, okay? We're going to go G major, C add 9, D, and we'll repeat that. After the second time, then we're going to go to the E minor, D, C add 9, G major. And we're going to repeat that again. And after that, then we go to the final part, E minor, G major, E minor, G major, E minor, G, and then we finish. Now let's go nice and slow. So G major. 1, 2, 3, 4. C add 9, D, back to the G major. Now to the C add 9, to the D, now to the E minor, to the D, C add 9, G major, back to the E minor, to the D, to the C add 9, to the G major, last part to the E minor, to the G major, to the E minor, to the G major, to the E minor, and then we're going to go to the D, back to the G major. Okay, I encourage you to scroll back and play this with me again. If you can get what we just did, really practice those switching chords. The faster you get at that and the smoother, everything will sound great. So, good luck guys. Thanks for watching.